I just... knowledge.
Captain Dumont. Kendra rolled over in his sleep, trying to find comfort on the rocky ground beneath his blanket. Only Quov Tsin had a tent. The mercenaries more accustomed to dealing with the elements. Yet the area around the ruins of Ureh seemed the most disturbing. The most awkward of places to try to rest even for such hardened fighters. Throughout the camp, the captain's tossing and turning were duplicated by every man save Gorst, who most believe could slumber peacefully on a bed of thorns.
Captain Dumont.
What? Kendra stirred, pushing himself slowly up on an elbow. Who's there? The nearly full moon shone with such brightness that it took little time for his eyes to adjust to the night. Kendra looked around, noted the snoring forms around the low fires. From the sorcerer's tent, the snoring sounded particularly loud. Damn place. The mercenary lowered his head again. He would be glad when they abandoned the ruins. Not even the field of battle left him so on edge.
Captain Dumont.
Kendra rolled off his blanket, hand already on the hilt of the dagger he always wore at his belt. The hair on the back of his neck stiffened, and a cold chill washed over the mercenaries' leaders as he focused on a figure only a few feet to his right. A figure who had not been standing there a second before. Of itself, that discovery might not have bothered the captain, for he himself could move with the utmost stealth. However, what did unnerve him so very much, even to the point where the dagger nearly fell from his shaking fingers, had to do with the fact that the one who faced him could be none other than the hapless Hargo. Faced might have been an inappropriate and unfortunate choice of terms, for Hargo no longer had a good portion of his. The right side of his head had been ripped away, exposing skull and rotting muscle. One eye had been completely lost, a deep red and black crater all that remained. The mercenary's bedraggled beard framed a mouth curled open to reveal death's grin. And the eye that did remain stared almost accusingly at Kentrel. The rest of Hargo had fared no better. The right arm had been gnawed away just below the shoulder, and the chest and stomach torn wide open, revealing ribs, guts, and more. Only tatters of clothes still existed, emphasizing even more the horrific fate of the man.
Captain Dumont.
Rasped the monstrous visitor. Now the dagger did slip. Kendrill's fingers limp. He glanced around, but no one else had been disturbed by this monstrous vision. The others all slumbered away. Hargo? He finally managed.
Captain Dumont.
The corpse shambled forward a couple of steps, water from the river still dripping from the half-devoured form.
You shouldn't be here.
As far as Kentrel had suddenly become concerned, he should have been back in Westmarch, drinking himself into a stupor at his favorite tavern. Anywhere in the world but where he now stood.
You can leave, Captain.
Legend speaks of a long-dead city known as Ureh, thought by many to have been a gateway to the high heavens. It is believed that every 2,000 years, when the stars align and the shadow of Mount Nymyr falls upon the ruins, Ureh is reborn, and all of its lost riches are revealed to those brave enough to seek them out. Now, after a lifetime of research and intense calculation, the Vizjerei sorcerer Quov Tsin has come to witness Ureh's rebirth for himself. But that which awaits Tsin and his higher band of mercenaries is nothing like what they expected. You'll find that the dream of radiant Ureh is, in fact, just a nightmare for one that will draw them inexorably into kingdom.
Knowledge.
Captain.
Hargo continued, ignorant of the fact that his own throat had a gaping hole in the side and therefore should not even let him speak.
There's death in this place. You got me and it'll get you all. All of you.
As he warned Kentrel, the ravaged figure raised the good arm he had left, pointing at his captain. The moon accented the pale, deathly sheen of Hargo's corpse, and the rot already taking place on the either otherwise untouched appendage. "What do you mean?" managed Dumont. "What do you mean?" But Hargo only repeated his warning.
It'll kill you all. Just like me, Captain. Take you all dead. Just like me, Captain.
And with that, the corpse raised his face to the moonlit heaven and let out a blood-chilling cry full of regret and fear. A brave man, Kentrel still broke. He fell to his knees, hands over his ears in a pathetic attempt to keep the heart-jolting sound out. Tears streamed from his eyes, and he looked earthward, no longer able to face the ghastly sight before him. The cry came to an abrupt halt. Still holding his ears, the mercenary captain dared to glance up, and awoke. Kentrel scrambled from his bedroll, tossing aside his blanket and stumbling to his feet. Only as he straightened did he realize that all around him his men acted in similar fashion. Shouts of dismay and wild looks abounding. Two men had swords free and now swung them madly about, risking injuring their fellows. One hardy fighter sat still, eyes wide and unblinking, body shivering. From more than one, Kentrel heard whispered or shouted a single name. The name of Hargo. "I saw him," gasped Oskald, "standing before me, as big as life." "Nothing live about him," snarled another. "Death himself couldn't have looked worse." "It was a warning," Benjamin declared. "He wants us out of here." The fighter reached down for his bedroll. "Well, I'm all for that." Seeing his men in disarray brought Captain Dumont back to his senses. Whatever fearful message Hargo might or might not have delivered, common sense still dictated certain cautions. "Hold it right there," the fair-haired officer shouted. "No one goes anywhere." "But Captain," protested Oskal, "you saw him too. I can see it, plain in your face." "Maybe so, but that's no reason to go fleeing into jungle. The better to end up dead like Hargo did, eh?" This bit of truth struck all of them. Oskal dropped his blanket, eyes briefly shifting to the murky landscape to the south. Benjamin shivered. "What do you say, Gorst?" Kentrel second appeared the most calm of the band, although even he had a perturbed expression on his generally cheerful countenance. Still, it did Captain Dumont some good to see that Gorst had not fallen prey to the panic of the others.
Better here,
Grunted the massive figure.
not out there.
You hear that? Even Gorst wouldn't venture back into the jungle right now. And you think you'd survive better? He had them back under control now. No one wanted to re-enter that hellish place, at least not in the dark. Even the almost full moon would do little to illuminate the many dangers of the jungle. Kentrell nodded. We'll decide better come morning. Now sheathe those weapons, put some order back into this camp, and build up those fires. They moved to obey, especially in regard to the last command. Kentrell noted them beginning to relax as the familiarity of the routine took hold. He felt certain that the nightmare would soon fade in the veterans' minds. Men in their line of work often suffered bad dreams. Kentrell himself still experienced nightmares of his first campaign, when his commander and nearly all of those in his squad had been slaughtered before his very eyes. Only luck had saved him then. But the memories of that terrible time remained clear. Yet, this horrific dream stood out even from those reoccurring torments, for Kentrell had not suffered it alone. Everyone had experienced it at the same time, in the same way. He had no doubt that if he questioned each man, they would all describe the details in more or less the exact manner. A harsh, cutting sound suddenly brought back vestiges of the fearful visage. Kentrell had his hand on the hilt of his dagger before he realized that what he had just heard had been in reality the sound of snoring. Quov Tsin's snoring. The Vizjerei had slept through not only the dream, but the panic ensuing afterward. In utter disbelief, Captain Dumont started forward the tent, only to pause at the last moment. What good would it do to look upon the sleeping sorcerer, or, for that matter, to awake him? Tsin would only sputter denigrating words at the captain, then demand to know why he had been disturbed. Kentrell backed away. He could imagine the Vizjerei's wrinkled face tightening into an expression of deep contempt once the spellcaster heard the reason. Big, brave mercenaries, frightened by a nightmare. Quov Tsin would laugh at such fear, mock Dumont and his men. No, Kentrell would let sleeping sorcerers lie. Tomorrow, however, he would inform their employer that the mercenaries had no intention of waiting for the gold of Ureh to come falling from the sky. Tomorrow morning, Kentrell's band would be leaving. After all, how much gold could dead men spend? Just into the jungle and well out of sight of the camp, the damp, shambling form of Hargo paused. Branches and leaves stirred up by the night wind fluttered through the ghastly form, unhindered by the rotting flesh and gnawed bone. The lone eye stared sightlessly ahead, and the mouth hung open, revealing a blackened tongue and gums. From atop a tall, gnarled tree, Zael looked down upon the ghoulish shade. In his hand, the pale necromancer held a tiny talisman shaped like a dragon, around which had been wrapped a piece of torn material. Your mission is done, he quietly informed the ghost. Rest easy now, friend. Not the most talkative fellow, remarked the skull from the branch upon which Zael had propped it. Me? I think death needs to have a little life to spice it up, eh? Be quiet, Humbart. The slim necromancer slipped the bit of fabric off the talisman, putting the latter then within the confines of his cloak. The cloth he studied for a moment. You think them boys will get the point? I should hope so. I went through much trouble for this. And indeed Zael had. He had smelled the death of one of the mercenaries from even his vantage point near the ruins. That had enabled him to track the death to its point of origin. And there, Zael had searched the area around the river for some time for any vestiges of the late, lamented Hargo. The necromancer had been rewarded with this scrap of garment, but only after dodging the hungry senses of the very beast that had taken the man. A bit of flesh, a few drops of blood. These would have served Zael better, but the cloth had come from the body of the dead, had been worn for so long close to his skin that it had contained link enough to its wearer for the summoning. Zael had only wanted to touch the sleeping minds of the other mercenaries, use their dead comrade to scare them into leaving Ureh before it became too late. Hargo's shade had performed his task to perfection. The necromancer felt certain that the fighters would flee the area come the first hints of sun. He had not even bothered to try the spell on the Vizjerei. Not only would it have been a waste of time, but the sorcerer's defensive spells active during his sleep might have warned of Zael's presence. That could not be condoned. He will have to leave if they do, the ebony-clad figure muttered to himself. He will have to. Living mostly alone, necromancers had a habit of talking much to themselves. Even after finding Humbart Wessel's remains 2 years before and animating the skull, Zael had been unable to break his old habit. Humbart did not care whether the other spoke to himself or to the skull. He answered as he felt, which meant often. That was a mighty fine piece of work, that was, he interjected. Maybe that'll send that sorcerer packing too. But only if the fighters do leave, you know. Of course they will leave. After an omen such as that experienced by all, they would be fools otherwise. But come the morning, my not-so-worldly friend, the sweet murmurs of gold can easily outshout the rasping mornings of a nightmare. Think you I came back for the lovely weather and the playful serpents of the river? Ha! Mark me, Zael. If they don't leave by daybreak, they won't be leaving at all. The jawless skull chuckled. Letting the scrap fall to the jungle floor, the necromancer nodded solemnly. Let us pray that you are wrong, Humbart.